The GOC and ROCOR 1971, Epistle of the GOC to ROCOR 1976. In 1971, Metropolitans Callistus of Corinth and Epiphanius of Kition, Cyprus, and the Chancellor Protopriest Eugene Tombros of the GOC, Matthewite, Synod, traveled to New York to meet with the Synod of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, ROCOR, in order to come into contact with your Synod and regularize spiritual communion with you for the strengthening of the holy struggle of orthodoxy. The ROCOR hierarchs showed great interest and admiration for the true Orthodox struggle in Greece, and when the Exposition of Faith of the Matthewite Synod was translated into Russian and read aloud by Archpriest George Grab to the Synod of Bishops, they unanimously accepted this confession of the faith, including the ecclesiological statements contained therein. Also, the issue of the single-handed consecration was discussed, and the hierarchs present regarded it to be an acceptable act of economia. The two Matthewite hierarchs then gave a report to the Holy Synod of the GOC in Athens. Shortly thereafter, Auxentios Pastras, the Archbishop of the Acacian Florinite faction, traveled to America in order to meet Metropolitan Philaret and the other ROCOR hierarchs, and also to persuade the ROCOR Synod not to accept the Matthewite hierarchs into communion due to the fact that they originate from the single-handed consecration of 1948. The ROCOR hierarchs, on the other hand, made it known that they did not consider the act of single-handed consecration to be outside the limits of economia. Archbishop Auxentios, however, insisted that the Matthewite orders should at least be somehow corrected. Otherwise, he will not recognize the ROCOR Synod's decision. Upon returning to Greece, Archbishop Auxentios stated that the Matthewite hierarchs were ashamed of their uncanonical orders and sought to have them corrected by the ROCOR Synod. This statement of Auxentius Pastras is proven to be false by the very petition the Matthewite delegates sent to the ROCOR Synod. In their petition, the Matthewite delegates clearly stated that they considered their orders to be completely valid and canonical, and not in need of correction. The relevant text of the petition is as follows. See Hockna, The Struggle Against Ecumenism, Boston, Massachusetts, 1998, p. 88. As is well known in the ancient Church, these acts, insofar as they are in accord with canonical injunctions, brings us to the sure conclusion that a consecration of a bishop by one bishop is canonical and necessary under these circumstances. Consequently, a bishop consecrated under such circumstances cannot be considered uncanonical, and therefore invalidly consecrated, unless, of course, other factors enter into the picture which would invalidate the consecrations, such as a consecration outside of the church building itself, simony, etc. Furthermore, by condescension and economia, any doubt that might exist concerning the canonicity of such consecrations is dispelled, especially when it is shown that they were performed in a time of persecution when no other bishop was to be found, as mentioned above. Consequently, it can be clearly understood that a consecration of a bishop by one bishop is, because of the situation that existed, permitted and therefore lawful, because it does not go beyond the limits foreseen by the Church's usage of economia. Wherefore, in view of this, we submit our present petition unto your holy and sacred Synod, and we are ready to accept its every decision based always upon the divine and sacred canons. New York, September 1971, the Synodical Committee, Callistos, Metropolitan of Corinth, Epiphanios, Metropolitan of Kition, Eugene Tombros, Protopresbyter. The Synod of Bishops of the Russian Orthodox Church abroad resolved the issue according to what they had been informed by various sources, and also acted according to the persuasions of Archbishop Auxentios Pastras. In their resolution, the ROCOR hierarchs wrote, "Earlier, in an address to the Synod on August 29, 1971, Archbishop Auxentius requested the Synod of Bishops of the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia to express its judgment regarding how clergymen of the Matthewites, that is, Old Calendar Greeks who are led by bishops originating from the consecration performed by one bishop, should be accepted. The history is as follows. When the Church of Greece in 1924 declared that it accepted the new calendar, discontent arose and several groups were formed which did not accept that reform. However, they were not united. In 1935, 3 bishops, who at that time belonged to the state church, Germanos of Demetrius, Chrysostom of Florina, and Chrysostom of Zakynthos, joined the movement. They immediately proceeded to consecrate 4 more bishops, Germanos of the Cyclades Islands, Christopher of Christianopolis, Polycarp of Diavlia, and Matthew of Brestina. However, those bishops soon developed disagreements and their synod dissolved. 3 bishops abandoned the movement. Germanos of Demetrius died. Only Polycarp of Diavlia and Matthew of Brestina were left, whereas Chrysostom of Florina separated from them and remained alone. In 1948, Matthew of Brestina, convinced that under conditions of persecution no other means existed to maintain a truly orthodox Greek hierarchy, proceeded alone to perform consecrations of bishops. It is impossible for us to clearly decide how far it could have been possible for him at the time to secure the assistance of Bishop Polycarp or Bishop Chrysostom in performing the first consecration. Firstly, the above history is full of errors. From this, it is clear that the ROCOR Synod did not have adequate information regarding this matter, as they themselves admitted. Since the ROCOR hierarchy stated that it is impossible for them to clearly decide whether a single-handed consecration was necessary in 1948, then it is equally impossible for the ROCOR Synod to have made an accurate decision based on historical facts. Please scroll up to the information regarding the single-handed consecration to see the conditions of those times. The resolution of the ROCOR Synod continues. As often happens in such cases, the Synod is faced by the confrontation of 2 principles, exactness and economia. Before deciding which point of view should prevail in this case, one must decide if it is at all necessary to apply one of these 2 principles, or, to be more exact, cannot the principle of economia extend so far as to recognize the Matthewite consecrations as valid in general? In other words, one must consider the validity of episcopal consecrations by one bishop. The resolution then continues by naming many cases throughout church history in which single-handed consecrations were performed and recognized as lawful. Regarding the last few words in the above quote, one must consider the validity of episcopal consecrations by one bishop. The ROCOR Synod later proved itself to believe in such a validity since the ROCOR Synod itself recognized the act of single-handed consecration which the ROCOR hierarch Barnabas of Caen performed on Lazarus of Tambov in the next decade. The ROCOR Synod's resolution then lists a number of canons that apply to bishops that have been consecrated without synodical approval. However, these canons do not apply to Bishop Matthew since he himself was the only remaining bishop of his synod, for the other bishops had either joined the new calendarists or had denied the true Orthodox confession of faith. The canons that the resolution listed, on the other hand, do apply to archbishops, Akakios, and Auxentios, and their synod. It is quite odd that the ROCOR Synod did not mention any of these canons when they received the Auxentian hierarchy, a hierarchy to which these canons strongly apply. Yet, these canons were brought up in regards to the resolution regarding the Matthewite hierarchy, to whom these canons do not apply at all. However, in the resolution regarding the Matthewite orders, the ROCOR Synod does at least mention the Akakio-Auxentian hierarchy's uncanonical origins. It is therefore understandable that the consecration of Archbishop Akakios and the consecrations which followed it raised doubts in many until it was confirmed and legalized by a decision of the Synod on December 18, 1969. The ROCOR. Synod's resolution then makes the following statement. A simple recognition of their orders could bring scandal as a direct violation of canons. The First Apostolic Canon, Canon 4 of the First Ecumenical Council, and Canon 3 of the Seventh Ecumenical Council. However, it is evident from the other examples mentioned that there is full reason to apply economia to them, in accordance with Canon 8 of the First Ecumenical Council and Canon 79 of Carthage. This statement is very strange to say the least. Firstly, because the second and third canons mentioned do not apply to the Matthewite Synod but rather to the Auxentian Synod, and this latter synod was simply recognized without a proper examination of the canons. Secondly, the fourth and fifth canons mentioned apply to Donatists and Novatians, whereas the ROCOR Synod assured in the same resolution that, from what was said in the beginning of this resolution, it is evident that the old calendarists headed by the hierarchy proceeding from Matthew's consecration can hardly be compared with such. The resolution then continues. Taking into consideration all the aforesaid, as well as the desire expressed by Archbishop Auxentios, the Synod of Bishops resolves 1. To acknowledge the possibility of fulfilling the petition of Metropolitans Callistos and Epiphanios. To that end, 2 bishops must perform the laying on of hands over them. They, in turn, must subsequently perform the same over their brethren, and all bishops over the priests. 2. To oblige Metropolitans Callistos and Epiphanios, as well as their brethren, to take all possible steps to unite their hierarchy, clergy, and people with those who are headed by his beatitude, Archbishop Auxentios. 3. To inform his beatitude, Archbishop Auxentios, concerning the aforesaid. 4. To delegate the Most Reverend Archbishop Philotheus and Bishop Constantine to fulfill the provision of paragraph 1 of this resolution at Transfiguration Monastery in Boston. For the Council of Bishops, Bishop Loris of Manhattan, Secretary to the Synod. Metropolitans Callistos and Epiphanios at first did not agree with this resolution, especially since it required the Matthewite hierarchs to receive a laying on of hands, whereas the Matthewite delegates believed that their orders were complete and without need of reordination. However, the ROCOR Synod assured Metropolitans Callistos and Epiphanios that the laying on of hands was simply a blessing and a confirmation of the form, Greek, whereas the essence, Greek, of the apostolic succession of the Matthewite Synod originates from 1948 and is recognized as completely canonical and valid. The ROCOR Synod reconfirmed this in 1974 when the second Matthewite delegation, Metropolitans Callistos and Nicholas, was sent to the ROCOR Synodal headquarters. Metropolitan Callistos confirms this also once again in his letter to the ROCOR Synod dated February 4, 1975. Also, the ROCOR Synod explained its interpretation of the laying on of hands in their resolution. See Hockna, The Struggle Against Ecumenism, Boston, Massachusetts, 1998, p. 94. There is some difference of opinion in regard to understanding the phrase laying on of hands. It seems that a more authoritative explanation was given by St. Theresios at the Seventh Ecumenical Council. When someone asked how one should understand the words laying on of hands in Canon 8 of the First Ecumenical Council, the saint explained that the word consecration is not used here but another one, and that this latter term means only a blessing. Also, Saint Nicodemus of Mount Athos, in his footnote to Canon 8 of the First Ecumenical Council, writes, see Oses, the Rudder, Chicago, Illinois, 1957, pp.177. That my words are true is attested by the Seventh Ecumenical Council. For when this same canon was read in the first act of the same council, and it was asked how the expression laying on of hands was to be understood, most saintly Teresios said that the phrase laying on of hands was employed here in the sense of blessing, and not with reference to any ordination. Hence, spiritual fathers ought to learn from this canon to lay their hands on the heads of penitents when they read to them the prayer of pardon. In the above passage, the phrase laying on of hands means a simple blessing with the prayer of pardon, such as is read over a penitent sinner after confession. Indeed, even Metropolitan Philaret of New York, in his letter to Metropolitan Epiphanius of Kition, #77 1528-79, referred to the laying on of hands as a prayer of absolution. This was because the prayer read over the Matthewite bishops was the same prayer read over a penitent sinner at the end of confession. This was the very prayer the Matthewite hierarchs were asked to read over their brethren and fellow clergymen, to wit, the prayer of absolution. Hence, the laying on of hands, accompanied by the prayer of absolution, was read over the already vested Matthewite hierarchs during the Divine Liturgy on the 17th and 18th of September, 1971, Old Style, in accordance with the ROCOR Synod's resolution. At the very same time, the Synod of Bishops of the Russian Orthodox Church abroad also informed Archbishop Auxentios Pastras, the leader of the Florinite Acacian faction, that they had entered into communion with the Synod of the Matthewites, and had accepted them as already vested bishops, with only the prayer of absolution read upon them as a simple blessing. Unfortunately, Archbishop Auxentios's reaction was extremely hostile. Upon receiving the news from the ROCOR Synod, Archbishop Auxentius wrote the following in an official encyclical. See Encyclical of Archbishop Auxentios, 534, dated the 18th of September 1971, Old Style. Although we were certain that they would not make any resolutions with them without our knowledge or consent, completely paradoxically and in spite of every expectation, we were informed that the Synod of the Most Reverend Philaret has decided to recognize as canonical the pseudo-bishops of the deceased Bishop Matthew. This foresaid information greatly afflicted us. Greek. But having already regained our composure, we have decided to confront the current situation from its very origin in a calm and serious manner. We do not know which excuses the Holy Synod of the Russian Church in America shall give for this perfidious act. Greek. We shall not occupy ourselves any further with them, and neither shall we recognize the uncanonical acts of anyone regarding this matter. Emphasis added, SM. Archbishop Auxentios' hostility towards the Matthewites, his refusal to accept the ROCOR Synod's resolution, and his unwillingness to enter into theological dialogue for the purpose of union with the Matthewite Synod, proved that Archbishop Auxentios did not truly care for the unity of the true Orthodox Christians, as he so claimed. On the contrary, Archbishop Auxentios' hostility and uncanonical acts brought further division. For instance, although Archbishop Auxentios was in communion with the ROCOR Synod, which was in communion with the Matthewite Synod, Archbishop Auxentios proceeded with the hasty consecration of Chrysostom Chiusis of Thessalonica and Akakios Moskos of Montreal, even though there were already long-standing hierarchs of the Matthewite and ROCOR synods, Demetrios of Thessalonica and Vitali of Montreal respectively, that held those very titles. Furthermore, Archbishop Auxentios' uncanonical acts caused at least 4 of his hierarchs to individually break communion from him by 1974, and Auxentios' uncanonical consecration of Gabriel of Lisbon eventually caused the ROCOR Synod to break communion from him within the same decade. Metropolitan Callistos of Corinth, Metropolitan Nicholas of Piraeus, and Archimandrite Kallinikos, the latter of which later became a bishop of the Callistite Synod and is currently within the Chiusite Synod, confirm in their official epistle to the Greek parishes in America, dated February 8, 1975, that the Greek Orthodox monasteries, parishes, and communities that found themselves within the ROCOR would only recognize the Matthewite Synod as the original true Orthodox Church of Greece. Furthermore, it is also well known that these same Greek ROCOR priests and their faithful, while visiting Greece, would only attend services and receive the sacred mysteries in churches belonging to the Matthewite Synod. After the Matthewite Synod had fulfilled the ROCOR Synod's requirement regarding the prayers of absolution, Metropolitan Philaret, on behalf of his Holy Synod, sent an official encyclical, dated October 21, November 3, 1972, to Archbishop Andreas, President of the Matthewite Synod, which stated the following: "We make it known to all that after the laying on of hands, which has been fulfilled as a blessing to your Beatitudes' sacred hierarchy, our Synod of Bishops of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia enters into full ecclesiastical and sacramental communion with the Orthodox Church of True Orthodox Christians of Greece, of which your Beatitude is a bishop. I cordially pray that our Lord will bless and guide the hierarchy, clergy, and laity of your Beatitudes' God-protected church forever. Your Beatitudes' devoted brother in Christ, Metropolitan Philaret, President of the Synod of Bishops. Bishop Loris, Secretary to the Synod of Bishops." However, Archbishop Auxentios, noticing the failure of his initial tactic of not recognizing the ROCOR Synod's decision regarding the Matthewite Synod, began his second satanic campaign by spreading false allegations that the Matthewite bishops were supposedly reconsecrated by the ROCOR Synod in 1971. Although this led to much confusion, Archbishop Auxentios failed to provide any evidence for his claims. In fact, most of the evidence proved quite the contrary. For example, the following document was sent by Archpriest George Grab, the director of the Public and Foreign Relations Department of the ROCOR Synod, dated October 25, November 7, 1973. Dear Mr. Shallcross, your letter of October 11, 1973 has been received. The bishops Kallistos and Epiphanios were not ordained by our synod. They were accepted into communion as bishops with only laying on of hands on them, already in bishop's vestments, according to the 8th canon of the First Ecumenical Council. That was to rectify beyond doubts the irregularity caused by the founding of their hierarchy through the consecration originally performed by one bishop. Aha. Sincerely yours, Archpriest George Grab. The above statement clearly shows that the Matthewite hierarchs were accepted into communion as bishops in full rank, and already vested in their hierarchical vestments, including omophorion, before the prayer of pardon was read upon them. In 1974, in order to clarify the facts and dispel Archbishop Auxentios' false allegations, Archbishop Andreas of Athens and all Greece, the president of the Matthewite Synod, wrote that the spiritual communion and union between the Matthewite and ROCOR synods in the year 1971 occurred. A. After the exposition of the faith of our church was read so as to be heard by the Synod of the Russian bishops, and only after the Russians unanimously and loudly confessed and accepted the confession of our Orthodox faith. B. Since they promised that they would also send a written statement containing the same confession, and since they united with us in this very sense and this very opinion, and with that also they recognized the orthodox and valid episcopacy, Greek, of our hierarchs. It would have been perhaps important if our hierarchs also showed the obligatory Christian and brother-loving, Greek, humility to accept the fulfillment of the external form of the laying on of hands, which was entirely in form alone, and not in essence. Our hierarchs had their episcopacy complete and perfect from the very moment of their consecration, and nothing at all was missing from them, neither charismatically nor dogmatically. That is, they possessed the entire fullness of the episcopacy. They had and they continue to have their episcopacy full and operative. Greek. The Russians, on the other hand, did not supplement their episcopacy, nor did they add anything, but rather they recognized the already existent episcopacy of the Matthewite Synod and not the inexistence thereof. The laying on of hands that occurred was and is nothing other than the performance of an external form, and this took place not for any reason other than to shut the unobstructable mouths of those who were long ago prescribed for this offense, and always contradict and oppose the truth, to wit, the Florino-Auxentians. This was so that one of their arguments, that is, their only worthy argument, that of the single-handed consecrations, would be completely deducted, and so that those who are the true and real genuine Orthodox Christians and shepherds would indicate the proper humility, conciliatory mood, and brother-loving opinion towards union. NB emphasis added, SM. Throughout this time period, the Matthewite Synod constantly sent epistles and encyclicals asking the Auxentian Synod to enter into dialogue with the Matthewite Synod for the purpose of communion and union for the sake of the true Orthodox struggle, in accordance with the desire of the ROCOR Synod as expressed in its resolution. However, Archbishop Auxentios refused to enter into dialogue with the Matthewite Synod, but rather continued to spread false allegations against the Matthewite hierarchs. Nevertheless, the fact that Archbishop Auxentios' false allegations contradicted one another was humorous, yet quite sad, to say the least. At first, Archbishop Auxentios refused to recognize the resolution of the ROCOR Synod of Bishops because the latter had uncanonically recognized the Matthewite Synod as canonical. However, when this initial position was no longer suitable, Archbishop Auxentios then began stating that the ROCOR Synod had reconsecrated the Matthewite hierarchy, when hierarchs of both the ROCOR and Matthewite Synods proved that this latter allegation was false. Archbishop Auxentios then stated that the Matthewites had received a regularization, but that they had supposedly later reverted it by denying that it was ever a regularization at all. The closest the Matthewites ever got to receiving a written confession of faith from ROCOR is the following letter from Archbishop Vitali of Canada to the Matthewite Archbishop Andrew. Your Beatitude. With regard to your Epistle 803 May 13, 1972, addressed to his Beatitude, since the President of our Holy Synod, Kyrios Philaret, has been for a long time absent abroad, I am undertaking the needed answer so that your epistle may not remain unanswered for long. The fact that the calendar innovation of 1924 brought schism to the Holy Orthodox Church could not be more obvious, and no orthodox and judicious person can ignore that sorrowful reality, so that no one may wrongly think that our Holy Russian Church, which is authoritatively represented by our Holy Synod, partakes in the most bitter taste of this damnable schism. Allow me to make mention to your beatitude of just two among many disasters which we, as Russian Orthodox, have undergone as consequences of that coup d'etat, which was carried out by Meletios Metaxakis and Chrysostomos Papadopoulos of sorrowful memory. Our Greek brothers have informed us about similar cases on the Holy Mountain, Cyprus, etc. It is wrong for one to think that there was a time during which we ourselves, the Orthodox Russian people, have not lived through the drama of the calendar change. The calendar issue was settled during the time of Pope Gregory, when the Orthodox Church was called to join the mentioned change. Already, from that moment, the Church has expressed her opinion, the Church has condemned and anathematized it. And the ecclesial conscience has many times and in many places confirmed that condemnation by many acts, declarations, and actions. Also, during the 20th century on the Holy Mountain, where our synod was not represented but the Serbian Church, which at that time sheltered us and with which we were spiritually and ecclesiologically united, was the then Bishop of Ohrid, Nikolai Velimirovich, did not consent to serve the liturgy with the other innovating hierarchs in the monastery of Vatupedi. So, our Holy Synod, from the very beginning, has been conscious that the calendar problem is the cause of a schism. During the lately convened Great Hierarchical Council in the Cathedral of St. Nicholas in Montreal, the seat of my mediocrity, the eternal condemnation of the Papist calendar was repeated, when we in a conciliar manner condemned the heresy of ecumenism, the door to which heresy has been shown in detail to be precisely this issue. With the authority of that council, the president of our Holy Synod wrote the second sorrowful epistle, in which he profoundly dealt with the calendar issue as the forerunner of ecumenism. So, our Holy Synod, having from the beginning the correct understanding with regard to that issue, never acknowledged the calendar change as an irrevocable act, but always awaited the opportunity for a pan-Orthodox council to be freely convened, not in order to give its opinion on the issue because the Holy Church has already done that from the beginning, but in order to reject the infiltrated deceit, no longer administering the condemnation as a preventative measure, as was the case in the past, but concretely in the case of the coup d'etat that had already taken place. If our Holy Church has until recently practiced condescension in the sphere of relations with other churches, it was in the hope that a free pan-Orthodox council would be convened, which, in our opinion, cannot happen without setting free the Russian Church. Seeing, however, that the desired pan-Orthodox council not only cannot be free, but also that it may not condemn the innovation and bring peace back to the Church, but that it will actually adhere to the heresy, we, obeying our hierarchical conscience, are ringing the warning bells. What further proof is needed to show that the confession of faith of our Holy Synod concerning the calendar change, as one that is the cause of a schism, is clear and consistent? In conclusion, we inform your beatitude that a Greek presbyter, Basil Sakis, a parish priest in Geneva in canonical subordination to our Holy Synod, has presented me with a voluminous work concerning the issue, justifying the conscientious stance of the true Orthodox Christians of Greece. Our blessed President Kyrios Philaret, in the form of a preface, has blessed the English translation of the work. In that detailed preface, you will find the expression of the opinion of the whole of our Holy Synod with regard to the validity of the anathemas regarding that issue, together with the eternal pan-Orthodox and conciliar opinion of the Eastern Orthodox Church. I believe that the mentioned preface can be used to remove any doubt and as a theoretical definition of faith of our Russian Orthodox Church in exile. Kyrix Inision Orthodoxon, August-September 1972. In 1976, the Matthewites severed communion with ROCOR. ROCOR had broken their promise to give them an official written confession of faith that the new calendarists were without grace, and were continuing, especially in the person of Archbishop Anthony of Geneva, to have communion with the new calendarists/world orthodoxy. Archbishop Anthony was continuing to concelebrate with the new calendarists at this time, causing several priests and parishes to leave him for the Matthewites.